Welcome to The Road. This is a weekly podcast of All Saints Lutheran Church. I'm your host, John Pedersen, and I serve as pastor. Each week, we reflect on faith, life, and navigating the road ahead. The language of journey is common when we think about life. It has its joys and challenges along the way, and we all need a little encouragement and guidance at times to keep us going. There's a word in the Bible, asphalia, which means truth, but it's the same root word we use in English for asphalt, if you can believe that. It's a solid surface that makes travel easier and more assured. And so every week we're going to be exploring elements of faith and life that keep us on the road. Faith isn't about living a perfect life. It's about finding our way, getting through rough spots, but seeking out those great vistas too. You can find my weekly message here, but you'll also find special conversations with guests who have insights on things like wellness, parenting, and living with unique purpose. If you appreciate this podcast, remember to subscribe where possible and share it with a friend. Here's this week's message. Well, let's be honest, that scene that we just heard about from Mark 6 seems like it should be coming from some dystopian novel. It's pretty messed up, but it's a glimpse into the world that John the Baptist and Jesus lived in. It's life under the strong arm of the Roman Empire, where acquiring and maintaining power dominates everything. It's a brutal picture of humanity. Sadly, that brutality and violence has not been eliminated from the human spirit 2,000 years later, whatever form that may take. In the wake of political violence yesterday and the political violence that has preceded it in recent years, we're called as a humanity to something better. When we're surrounded by events like this and so many other concerns, it's easy to have our imaginations and spirits overcome by the kind of fear and foreboding that have existed under the rule of people like Herod during the time of Jesus. But it's in a spirit of defiance that we are beginning a new series today called Change Your World. When we look out and see things that worry us, there are a variety of faithful responses to that. But we have to make a positive impact in some way. And what that looks like will depend on you and your gifts and your interests. But as followers of Jesus, we have to be part of reclaiming the hope and joy of faith, which have the power to change our world, and who knows, maybe even a little bit of the rest of the world along with it. We need to keep on the sunny side of life. Whatever your personal situation is, or whatever you see that needs attention in the world around you, we don't always get to choose personal events or the times we live in, but there's something we can do. St. Francis de Sales is credited with the encouraging words, "Bloom where you're planted." It's assurance to have courage and hope wherever we find ourselves. And in a similar spirit, there's a story about Martin Luther, who was once asked what he would do if he knew that the world was ending tomorrow. And some of you know this. He responded, "Plant a tree." A defiant act. As followers of Jesus, we will always seek to be people of courage and hope. We'll never ignore difficult and painful realities, but we'll always work in a spirit of peace and love in spite of it. David Brooks is a well-known columnist and speaker. Back in the 1990s, he was a foreign correspondent for the Wall Street Journal, and in 1991, he was in Russia when Boris Yeltsin was elected the first democratic president of Russia. And some of you who lived during that time know or might remember that period, and there was an attempted coup by those previously in power. And there were dramatic scenes of tanks rolling through Moscow and Yeltsin and supporters in front of the Russian parliament building. And Brooks was there that day and says he ran into a 94-year-old woman in the crowd named Valentina Kosieva. And she was handing out sandwiches to the democratic protesters who'd gathered. And he asked her, "How did you get into this? What's your interest here?" And she said, "Well, let me tell you, when I was a girl, my family was connected to the royal family in the household of the Tsar. And then when the revolution happened, the royal family was killed. And I fled, and I was part of the Russian Revolution. And there was a civil war right after the revolution, and I was almost executed because I harbored some of the people who were anti-communist in those days." And fascinated, Brooks asked, "So then what happened?" And she said, well, I had a husband in the 30s, and Stalin sent him away to the Gulag and had him killed. And so he said, what happened after that? And she said, well, we had 2 boys, and they were fighting against the Nazis in World War II. And my youngest son was beaten to death in the Battle of Stalingrad, and my other son was shot. And she continued, I married another guy, and in the 1950s, he was also sent to the Gulag in Siberia. And he either died of disease or execution. I never found out which. And Brooks asked, well, then what happened? And she said, well, I'm part of the Kalmyk people, which is a Muslim population in the former Soviet Union. And Khrushchev, she said, decided we were all going to be sent to internal exile. So we were all ripped from our apartments, and we were sent to internal exile somewhere in Russia. And Brooks observes that basically every terrible thing and trauma of Soviet history happened to her. And when she's 94, she's handing out sandwiches for the democratic protesters to create a better Russia. So the question in this story for you and for me is, do you know how to make sandwiches? Do you know how to take terrible circumstances and do something good despite all of it? And if you don't, then maybe we can figure it out together. It's hard to do things in isolation anyway. We don't have to do it all ourselves. We don't have to come up with all the genius ideas. But our presence matters. Our hopeful and courageous spirit matters. And when we think back to the story of Herod that we heard earlier, we might wonder, how could Herod be so terrible? The answer is that he's not operating out of a moral framework. He's operating out of a power framework. And I'm sure he didn't think he was so bad. Herod believes he's just trying to preserve his realm, no doubt for his people. And John the Baptist is threatening to bring it all down by his criticisms of Herod's behavior. Herod may feel bad about it, but he believes he has to do whatever it takes to preserve his power and status and avoid any sign of weakness. His new wife Herodias, who is also a target of John's criticism, sees John as a threat to her social standing and reputation, which adds a layer to this whole mess. When Herod says he'll do anything for her daughter, including offering her half of his kingdom, her own plotting and manipulation of Herod's position corner him into making a bad decision. But Herod is the one who is willing to do anything to steal his half-brother's wife in the first place. This brother is operating another part of their father's former territory, and they are in competition. Welcome to the Herod family. And if power is our primary lens and goal, there will be inevitable excuses for horrifying actions at some point. A lot could be said about John the Baptist's role in this story, but the same virtues we want to celebrate in John for speaking the truth with courage and hope are the same ones that really we expect of Herod. We expect him to have more courage not to execute John for threatening his rule over a petty request. But of course, Herod has a lot at stake. If he doesn't show strength, his enemies may see an opening. Being reasonable and moral could be a major risk in the kind of environment Herod has created. His decision is made. When we really stop and think about it, we also expect Herod to embrace hope. That may not be the virtue that comes to mind immediately for us, but we expect him to believe that he can do the right thing even in that situation. We expect him to try and create a better world despite what he's gotten himself into, and that something better can emerge. He was the one who arrested John initially, and he seems to be fighting an internal battle over what to do about him. You know, there's maybe some little moral component inside of him, but he allows that to be overwhelmed by other considerations. There's something about John that he likes despite the threat he poses, but in the end, he just doubles down on the darkness. Herod is completely immersed in cynicism, and that was kind of the lifeblood of the Roman Empire of that day, with a similar attitude when Jesus is on trial and speaking with Pontius Pilate. Jesus says, "For this reason I was born, and for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice." And in that story, Pilate, dripping with cynicism, asks him, "What is truth?" He's not looking for an answer. It's not a real question. He doesn't care about the truth anymore. It doesn't matter. And that's what makes brutality possible. Prior to events in Pennsylvania yesterday, the Washington Post published an article documenting many who use Scripture to justify violent goals. Increasingly, there are extremists who wear the cloak of religious faith and use violent language and images. Our church, the ALCA, has publicly repudiated this kind of rhetoric. We don't have a lot of definitive information about the motivations or background of the individual from yesterday, but regardless, it's just important to repeat and say again that there is no place for political violence. It's not acceptable from anyone, regardless of viewpoints. It's a complete and total contradiction of who Jesus was. Jesus was the one who, at his arrest, told one of his disciples to put his sword away. Again, as I said at the start, it's easy to become trapped in this kind of catastrophism. All of us are called to look for the hope in whatever situation we're in and work for peace. So instead, let's take time to reflect on how we can create something good, even if we doubt whether it will even make a difference. Bloom where you're planted. Bring light to the world around you somehow, even if it feels uncertain and feeble. In the words of Martin Luther King Jr., who was assassinated, "Darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that." David Brooks, who writes a lot about the state of society, in a recent speech reported that we've gotten a lot sadder, pessimistic, and angry as a society. We face rising suicide rates and mental health problems. The number of people who don't have close personal friends is up 4 times since 2000. The percentage of high school students who say they're persistently hopeless and despondent is 45%. The number of people not involved in a romantic relationship is up by 1/3 since 2000. The number of people who rate themselves in the lowest happiness category is up by 50% since the same time. For the last 4 years, All Saints has been working to promote well-being in ourselves and in our community. You heard me talk about it before. It's about tending to every phase of our well-being, including our spiritual wellness. And just a quick note about that. Not every spiritual belief we have is always in line with what Jesus taught. And not every belief we develop stands the test of time. And if the faith you hold on to seems to reinforce perpetual anger about the other or makes you feel judged, then maybe there's some exploration we can do together. There may be an opportunity to find peace in reconnecting with Jesus, who extends forgiveness and love rather than judgment, both to you and your neighbor. If you're not feeling well emotionally or you struggle with your mental health, there are other resources too, like people who've been there and counselors who have expertise and tools to help. We have a wellness self-assessment on our website that is completely confidential, and it's a quick and no-cost way to take a first step in identifying 6 areas where you may have opportunities for growth on your own, or where you might want to seek out some help in conversation with others. The Be Well tab on our website also has a lot of different resources that you can start with. None of us can do this alone, and sometimes we need to lean on others to help us find that hope and courage again inside of each of us. We're here to help and walk with you and help you connect with others. Part of our vision here at All Saints is to make a relevant impact by creating relationships and positively shaping the tone and culture of our community through meaningful conversations. We need that today more than ever. And if you want to join us as we seek greater well-being for ourselves and our community, let's walk together and help change our world step by step. Bring some sandwiches. to the potluck or a side dish for dessert. Amen. That's this week's message. You don't have to navigate the road ahead alone. You can join with others at All Saints. Visit allsaintsmtka.org for more information. Have a great week.